Hello, everyone, and welcome to the MENA Mix from the Institute for Middle East Options, our monthly podcast where we unpack the region's key headlines with leading experts and policy professionals. I'm Farah Bdour. I'm a political analyst with background in conflict resolution and mediation. Much of my work focuses on Jordan-Israel relations, and most recently, I served as a senior advisor to Israel, Palestinian territories, Egypt, and the Levante program at the United States Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C. Today, we will be looking into key headlines from the month of August. We are happy to have with us Firas Maksad. Firas is the managing director for the MENA Practice at Eurasia Group and one of the most insightful voices on the Middle Eastern affairs. Firas held a number of senior roles at the Middle East Institute. He taught at George Washington University. He writes for media outlets like Washington Post and Wall Street Journal. And also, he's a frequent commentator on CNN, BBC, and Bloomberg. Firas, Yami Talabik, we are so happy to have you with us.
أهلا فيك فرح. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
You know, before getting into the inflaming stuff and the heavier headlines from this month, I know, Firas, you were in Lebanon recently, and you even celebrated your birthday. So happy birthday, العمر كله يا رب. Maybe if you could share with us, during this visit, how did you feel Lebanon and how the Lebanese people are doing?
Yeah, Farah, I'm a frequent visitor to Beirut. Obviously, for those who don't know, I'm originally Lebanese, although 23 years a Washingtonian. It feels different every time. I visited at least 3 or 4 times just this year. You can feel the change the minute that you land in Beirut airport. Clearly, there is an organized effort to reshape the country, to send out the signal that it's a new, fresh start, that reforms are being implemented. Again, you see it upon landing in passport control. You see it when you take that highway from the airport into the city. The posters that were there that are no longer there. Obviously, Hezbollah used to loom large there. Everything has a fresh coat of paint on it. But it's also a tale of two cities. One that is celebrating that new start and feels that Lebanon might get a new lease on life, hopefully with support from partners and allies in the international community, in the Gulf in particular, the US where I am. But then there's another story, which is large swaths of the countries have been devastated by Hezbollah's war with Israel that commenced last year and ended with a ceasefire that is shaky at best. Entire villages, some 60, I believe, is the number, remain flattened, particularly that line of villages right across the border from Israel, overlooking it on the ridge, but also parts of the southern suburbs. So there, the mood is obviously very different. And the question about what will happen with Hezbollah, what will happen to Hezbollah's arms, looms large. The issue of reconstruction, where the money will come from, obviously something that is on the minds of many there. So for that reason, you get very mixed feelings depending on where you go in Beirut and beyond Beirut. And I'd like to say it's a tale of two cities.
I have to say, as most Jordanians, like we have this love affair with Beirut. It's a city of resilience and beauty. And if anything, I hope it will recover fully and rise again with the grace it has always carried, inshallah, ya Rab. Since we are in Lebanon, let me bring some recent developments from that file. Firas, there was a significant announcement this month by the office of Prime Minister Netanyahu, in which he acknowledged the important decision by the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah by the end of this year. And even the statement suggested that Israel is willing to help and support in that regard, and in return engage in these reciprocal measures, including the withdrawal from the 5 points that it recently occupied. And of course, this is part of the Tom Barak's plan. And I have to say, when this statement was published, I was talking to an Israeli friend, and she was telling me that this statement is so good to be true. And indeed, if you look at it, it carried this sentiment of cooperation, of extending hands, of envisioning a future for both Lebanese and Israelis, and not exactly the kind of statements that you would expect from Mr. Netanyahu. Now, before we go into headlines around Tom Barak's proposal, I just want to spend some time in reflecting on this positive language that we rarely hear about in the Middle East, because I'm struggling to determine which lens should we use in order to read it. Should we use the domestic lens? As you know, this statement was not only issued in English, it was also issued in Hebrew. During a time when there is a number of surveys that shows that there is a clear contradiction between Mr. Netanyahu's policies in Gaza and what the Israeli public wants. And I was wondering whether this is Mr. Netanyahu being the shrewd politician he is. It's just his way of shifting the attention from Gaza, a file that he poorly managed, to Lebanon, a file that he excelled at. I don't have the numbers, but I assume that most of Israelis, they are very satisfied of how he dealt with this issue. And this is his way of shifting the attention, of challenging the narrative that is being weaved around him, that he opens these fronts motivated by his political survival and desire to stay out of prison. So this is one lens. The other lens that I'm thinking about is the Washington one, that Mr. Netanyahu is basically sensing that that the patience with his policies is shifting, that there is a rising concern in Washington that his policies is actually isolating Israel on international level, even more than that, turning Israel into a pariah state. And Mr. Trump being, who has like a very sharp instinct in identifying political winners and losers, he doesn't want to identify with Mr. Netanyahu, who's being isolated internationally and who performs poorly domestically. So I think this is a very long way for me to ask, like, how should we read these kind of positive statements in the region?
Yeah. Listen, so much food on the table here. Where do I start? First point. Okay, my first point is that there is a disconnect between Israel and the United States on a number of files. Lebanon is only but one of them. I look at Syria. There's clearly a disconnect there too. Tom Barak and what he's trying to accomplish in both countries, on behalf of President Trump, by the way, not just freelancing, but President Trump was very clear in terms of what U.S. foreign policy towards Syria is. He outlined that in his, key visit to Riyadh when he gave that speech, and the sanctions were announced that they were going to be lifted. It's very clear that Washington adopted the process unfolding in Damascus, and that Damascus has the support, warts and all, issues with Ahmad al-Shara. We can talk about Sweda. We can talk about the events of the coast. I know we will get to them later on. But there's a very clear line and message from Washington communicated to Israel about what the policy is on Syria. Clearly, Netanyahu is not playing ball when it comes to Syria and what Washington needs to see happen. The repeated attacks, the incursions, and so on and so forth. Not to speak of the attack on the Ministry of Defense in Damascus when Sweda was unfolding. Similarly, in Lebanon, Tom Barak is pushing a path that would more easily allow the Lebanese state to begin the process of disarming Hezbollah. Now, there ought to be no illusions here. I mean, this, up until recently, was the most powerful non-state actor in the world. A significant portion of Lebanon's Shia community supports it, not all of them. Certainly, there's a lot of discontent in the community, particularly on the back end of that conflict with Israel, which many perceive Hezbollah as having brought upon them. This was not a war of necessity. This was a war of choice, a war perhaps in support of Iran and its allies in the region, Hamas being one of them. And so there's a lot of discontent in the community. But it's still a very difficult effort to try and dismantle what was until recently the most powerful non-state actor in the world. And there's a sense that even on Lebanon and on Hezbollah, Netanyahu is not being very helpful to the American effort and to Tom Barak. And that brings me to the second disconnect, which is hearing you talk about the domestic perception of Netanyahu's statement on Lebanon and how it was perceived so positively. and the use of flowery language and cooperation and assistance. That's exactly the kind of language that is unneeded, unnecessary, and unwelcome in Beirut, because it essentially does very little in terms of substance to move the needle. Yet it gives a public embrace, a bear hug, to a Lebanese government that does not need to be seen as being close to Bibi Netanyahu or in the good graces of Bibi Netanyahu. What Lebanon needs right now, what that government needs, is actual movement on the ground, meaning Israeli withdrawal from some of the 5 points. One, in compliance with a ceasefire that was signed last November, an American-French-sponsored ceasefire. But two, to showcase that diplomacy, which the Lebanese government is spearheading, does deliver, as in contrast to Hezbollah and Iran's choice, which is the use of arms, the continued war, and the fighting. So what materialized of the Tom Barak visit is actually very little from a Lebanese perspective. He came back without a commitment from the Israeli government and Netanyahu, without having them sign on and approve to the American paper, the American proposal, which is essentially a time-bound but conditional, step-by-step from the Lebanese side and the Israeli side to eventually move down the path of an Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon, disarmament of Hezbollah, a return of some of the Lebanese that are continued to be held in Lebanon, an end to the strikes, and the establishment of an end to the conflict between the two countries by going back to a ceasefire or so none of that was approved by the Israeli government. What we got is flowery language that's in public that is actually most unhelpful from a Lebanese perspective.
Exactly, Firas. And I have to say the Lebanese government are basically arguing that what you just said, that the notion of disarming Hezbollah is by itself is a huge step that should be supported by international and regional countries. But they also want to see the Lebanese, the Americans exercising more pressure on the Israeli side. And they are also arguing that the 5 points that Israel is actually occupying is not strategic, and they do not serve any security purpose. And I have to say, talking to some voices in the security establishment in Israel, they agree. They basically saying that Hezbollah right now does not pose any existential threat to Israel, that after October 7th, Israel rose as this regional superpower and can afford actually to withdraw gradually, as you said, from these points. But how to frame this? Do we frame it as a sequencing dispute? Do we frame it as the American inability to exercise pressure on the Americans? It's all the questions that we need to answer. Firas, I also want to bring I would say the Israeli concern regarding the Lebanese army plan to disarm Hezbollah. Because basically what they're saying that the plan is not realistic in terms of timeline and approach. So when we're talking about the timeline, they're saying that Hezbollah has long infiltrated the Lebanese army and intelligence. And to address this issue, you will need a very long time. When it comes to approach, we know that the Lebanese army plan to engage in a dialogue to convince Hezbollah to disarm. And this comes when we have big headlines by the Secretary General Naim Qassem, basically saying that Hezbollah refused to release the arms. Not only that, he threatens to go to the street, and nobody, I think, in Lebanon wants to test whether he's bluffing or not. He insists on linking any release of arms to the Israeli withdrawal. And then we have another headline that I think is also as important that comes from the Chief of Staff in the Lebanese Army, Mr. Rodolphe Hayek, in response to Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham suggestion that the Lebanese army should consider Plan B, which is the use of violence. And basically, the Chief of Staff saying that they refuse any imposed Plan Bs, and he refused to be complicit in any, Lebanese fighting. And just a couple of days ago, we have, which I don't know how to characterize, is the statement by Nabih Berri, was saying that the Hezbollah arms is a red line. So how do we read these headlines, and how do we frame it? And is it realistic that the Lebanese army will be able to disarm Hezbollah by the end of this year?
Yeah. Again, a lot to unpack here, so let's get going. The question about the Lebanese army, Mukhabarat Jaysh, military intelligence, other intelligence services in Lebanon being infiltrated and penetrated by Hezbollah is a good one. There has been a reshuffling of some key security appointments since the election of President Aoun and the coming to power of Prime Minister Nawaf Salam. I think we know well that both of them are not necessarily friends of the organization. So there is a continued need for security sector reform in the country in order to better position it to deal with both domestic and external challenges. I can tell you from key interlocutors, Lebanese and otherwise, that when Israel was in the midst of assassinating key Hezbollah figures throughout its war with Hezbollah last year, it was news to most Lebanese mukhabarat intelligence services who these figures were. Lebanese intelligence services had not done their homework, the basic homework of who's who in Hezbollah's military structure, had not done their homework because that was not part of the political directive that was given to them in the space that they were allowed in past governments. Mm-hmm. This has changed, and it's a very significant shift. And the Lebanese army and most, not all intelligence services right now are doing their homework, or at least that's what I understand. Mm-hmm. Now, that's separate from saying that the LAF is willing to butt heads with Hezbollah militarily. I think there's clearly an aversion to that. I saw the commander of the LAF on my recent visits there. We had a long discussion about that, and there's no doubt that there are all kinds of questions, not only in terms of capability, but force cohesion. It's a path that Lebanon in general would rather avoid if at all possible. And we are caught in this situation where, is the Secretary General of Hezbollah bluffing? Do we need to call it the state? Does the state need to call its bluff? But there's also a broader question that keeps arising, which is Hezbollah the proper address? Mm. Does Hezbollah have the capability to hand over its weapons, should it choose to? Or are these Iranian weapons, and therefore is the decision an Iranian decision? And the Lebanese state and those who are prodding it to go down that path are essentially knocking on the wrong door. I can tell you, when I was in Beirut last, before I saw you, I was stepping out of a meeting and I saw all the cameras lined up, all the media, and I knew it wasn't for me. So I said, what are all the cameras for today? And it was because Ali Larijani, the National Security Advisor of Iran, was stepping in for a meeting an hour after I was. And very clearly, after Larijani's visit to Beirut, Naim Qassem and Hezbollah took a much tougher position, an uncompromising position about the fate of its weapons. So if the answer to this question is, well, the address is in Iran and not in the southern suburbs of Beirut, then that means a different course of action is required. And this is where kind of you hear most Lebanese politicians hinting about the need for an American-Iranian understanding about what to do with Hezbollah's weapons and essentially the fate of those weapons in Lebanon. It's not a question I have an answer for. If we determine that such an understanding is impossible, that means that a clash between the Lebanese army and the security services and Hezbollah on the basis of these weapons and what to do with them is more likely. If we believe that there is a possibility of an understanding between America and Iran, then that opens the pathway to dialogue and diplomacy.
Wow. Hopefully we will not reach that scenario. But that, brings a question about the whole way that Barak's paper was designed, because there is a big element about creating incentives to Hezbollah community and Hezbollah fighters, providing payments. There were a number of headlines about the Saudis and the Qataris willing to invest in economic zones. And if this is the case, I think, I don't know whether it is relevant to talk about incentives, financial incentives to Hezbollah. And
Well, I'm smiling because you color me skeptical when it comes to the Trump economic zone in
okay.
South Lebanon, as skeptical as I am about the Riviera in Gaza, the Trump Riviera in Gaza. Listen, there are all these grandiose visions, and President Trump is, if he's good at one thing, it's branding, and the people around him understand that. It's a Trump economic zone here, a Trump Riviera there, Trump towers all over. At the end of the day, if you don't solve the underlying political issues, none of that is likely to materialize. I would also say very quickly, if I may, that in terms of the resources of the GCC, because obviously you talk to anybody here in Washington from the Trump administration, and nobody wants to be spending the money. Nobody wants the US to be doing the reconstruction and rebuilding. In fact, we saw USAID dismantled and anything having to do with foreign aid being significantly trimmed back, if not canceled. And so we go back to the pockets of our friends and allies in the GCC. But if you look around the region, I mean, you start adding up the number of what the mammoth task ahead in Syria requires and what is required for a completely devastated strip of land in Gaza that time and again people keep referring to as uninhabitable. And then you talk about now an economic Trump zone in southern Lebanon. And I mean, at the end of the day, these countries, be it the Saudis or the Qataris or the Emiratis, they have their own priorities and they have their own economic visions. And they're not looking to spend, good money after bad in places like Gaza and southern Lebanon. And in Syria might be a different question. So again, color me skeptical when it comes to yet another Trump economic zone.
I completely agree. There is a competition in terms of like which one is the priority, right? Is it Lebanon, Syria, or Gaza? Before we cross the border to Syria, Firas, I have to hear your comments on the recent drama around Mr. Tom Barak's comments when he held a press brief with the Lebanese journalist. When he basically described the journalist's behavior as chaotic and animalistic. There was at the beginning like a confusion, like what is the exact word that he used, but later on he went out and apologized, of course, for the Lebanese people. But this is the kind of comments that created a lot of uproar across the spectrum, right? Not only by the media affiliated by Hezbollah, but basically by everyone. And for us who've been studying conflict, like we know this kind of slip of the tongue, it's more common than when we expect. Like when you were, watching and following, especially the Arab media, were there a moment when you were saying like, oh my God, this is the moment when everything will collapse before our eyes? Did the idea like cross your mind?
Listen, I certainly thought it was a significant setback. Not only for Tom Barak, but also the broader effort that includes both Lebanon and Syria. I say that as being a fan of what Tom Barak is trying to accomplish. From the get-go, after the collapse of the Assad regime, I was publicly repeating that this is a moment of great opportunity and a moment of great peril for not only for Syria, but also for all the countries around it. You look around Syria after the collapse of the Assad regime, and it is surrounded by American partners and allies. Turkey up north, then American allies, second largest army in NATO after the US, Israel and Jordan to the south, the SDF, the Kurds to the northeast, supported and trained and armed by the United States, the LAF in Lebanon, the Iraqis also, dependent on American aid and assistance on the military side. So this was a moment where all of America's political strategic competitors were set back. The Iranian axis, the Russians were on their back foot. But for the US to get this right, it needed a great deal of diplomacy because all these American partners and allies had competing agendas. all of them had their own ideas of what needs to happen in Syria and wanted to project and exert influence in the Levant as a result of that vacuum that opened up. So I, for one, am very thankful that we have a Tom Barak, that the United States, that Washington, D.C. is affording the necessary bandwidth for diplomacy that is needed to get Syria, Lebanon, and the Levant right. And we see the pushback, or at least the attempted pushback, against some of the Israeli overreach in southern Syria, but also in Lebanon with what Tom Barak. That said, as an observer, I cannot but admit that Tom Barak has had his fair share of slip-ups. This is not the first one. I would like to remind you that he came to Lebanon just a few weeks ago and said, look what Ahmad al-Shara is doing. He is moving at warp speed. You Lebanese risk being left behind. You might be even incorporated back into Syria, into the broader Bilad al-Sham, which left every American friend and ally and partner in Lebanon.
Use of the colonialistic, language is unbelievable.
I mean, every anti-Hezbollah politician who has been for years waving the flag of Lebanese sovereignty had to stand up in front of a mic and condemn Tom Barak for those comments, suggesting that Lebanon could be part of Syria again. Arguably, Ahmad al-Shara's decision-making process to enter Sweden and to launch this campaign was at least partly influenced by the kind of bear hug, this kind of unconditional support that he got from Tom Barak and the administration. He left Tom Barak on that very same trip where he said Lebanon could become part of Syria if it doesn't move fast enough. Went up to Damascus, gave Ahmad al-Shara a bear hug, told him he must be so proud of himself given all that's happening in Syria. And a few days later, Ahmad al-Shara decided to launch that ill-fated campaign into Sweden, and we can talk about that. So all I'm telling you is that the animalistic comment made by Tom Barak is yet another one of those missteps in a series of missteps that we've witnessed in his effort to get things right, get all the ducks in a row in the Levant. He's apologized for it. He's on record apologizing for it, and that's to his credit. But overall, I'm glad that the United States is affording these issues the diplomatic bandwidth that they deserve.
Thank you, Firas. So let us touch on the point that you have raised about the Suwaida situation and the protection of the Druze community in Syria. Right now, the Americans are facilitating this security arrangement between Israel and Syria. We don't know exactly what the arrangement would look like, but based on many reports, that Israel is insisting on having a demilitarized zone in the Golan Heights on the Syrian side. They insist that the Syrian army will not operate in sensitive identified area, and most importantly, they want to block any strategic weapons from entering the country. And they want to establish this humanitarian corridor between Israel and Suwaida to protect the Druze communities. And my understanding that in return, Syria will receive the generous support from the international community and regional countries, something that you alluded to, that it might be more a priority for the regional countries than any other front. And as you said also, that based on the recent trip that Mr. Trump had to the Gulf, he seems to adopt the regional voices that said that we need to kosherize Ahmad al-Shara and bring him back to the Arab fold. And this is the only way to fight the Iranians. And they are putting so much effort in legitimizing him. But with all that effort, when you look at Israel, every time that we have a Syrian official will go out and say, like, we don't want to threat Israel, we don't want to attack Israel, Israel will respond by actually violating the sovereignty of Syria. We have a recent headline from Foreign Minister Asad al-Shibani, basically condemning Israel for the recent the commando operation near Damascus. And I'm struggling to understand like how the Americans are viewing the Syrian fight. From one hand, they want to legitimize Ahmad al-Shara, but the Israeli action is actually contradicting that. And we have also the view that, especially when it comes to the Suwaida, because somehow everything is starting to be used through the Suwaida and the protection of minorities lens, one would argue that without the Israeli intervention, the safety and the security of the Druze community in Suwaida will be compromised, drastically. So how do we read this from these different angles that I just outlined?
Yeah, listen, at a personal note first, one of my best friends is from Sweden, somebody I went to high school with, and as a result of that, back in the good old days, a much younger version of me used to take that trip across the border from Beirut to Sweden quite often. And so I have a particular window into what happened there with people that I knew and I grew up with on the ground in Sweden. And it's most unfortunate. There's no way to sugarcoat it. President Ahmed Shara committed a mistake, I think one which he now himself acknowledges and has backed away from. I think he realized that this was in many ways a trap. Some will say a trap that was set for him. And he has recalibrated and now has engaged in a discussion about how to deal with Sweden in a non-militaristic way. But in many ways, the damage has been done. This is a province where throughout the Syrian uprising and civil war had a unique position. They very clearly were not for Assad and the regime and celebrated his downfall, much as most Syrians celebrated his downfall. But at the same time, were very cautious in their relationship with the rebels and feared what might come after Assad, wanted to preserve the more secular nature of the way that the government is governed and run. Before that attack was launched by Damascus, there was an active political debate within Sweden about what the relationship with Damascus would look like. And there were very influential voices basically making the case that there's no hope, there's no future for Sweden outside the orbit of Damascus. It had to be part of Syria, the broader Syria that is now being rebuilt and reconstructed. And through negotiation, an understanding had to be reached. Obviously, there was another voice, a leading voice that had the support of Israel for quite some time now, for over 2 years, and had the benefit of Israeli support and resources that were also being used to support much of the needy throughout the province, whether in terms of food, aid, assistance, and even money and weapons. By launching that attack, Damascus forced most of the Druze, not to say all the Druze, to fall back in line with, this is an attack against the community. Everybody needs to stand in line and defend. And now it's much harder to identify those voices in the community that want that strong, that believe in that stronger relationship with Damascus and essentially in a centralized state in Syria. And that's most unfortunate. Not a situation where blame can be laid on one side, but I do think that Ahmed Shara understands that he miscalculated in his approach to that. But let's widen the lens here. Syria is a story of competition between Turkey and Israel. Okay. And where various minority groups are being used and utilized to the advantage of these bigger states in the region that historically have exercised control and influence. And I was a bit surprised to see Sweden unfold, because I very much had been part of discussions and conversations where understandings were being reached between the Israelis and the Turks about those lines of control within Syria. I can even share that a military hotline to deconflict had been established between the two after the incident at the T4 airbase, where the Israelis struck, fearing and believing that the Turks had been setting up a drone center there, which the Turks deny. But after all these incidents, understandings had been achieved, and a deconfliction line had been set up. And so I was a bit surprised to see Sweden unfold. I believe right now where things are is that they've stabilized between Israel and Turkey, and this is much to the involvement of American diplomacy between the two. And there's at least an effort on the American side to keep the Israelis at bay and to solidify these understandings. which would then obviously then hopefully translate also to understandings between Sweden and the southern province of Sweden, between Damascus and the southern province of Sweden.
I hear you, Firas, but a number of reports reporting on the recent commando operation that took place in Damascus, basically saying that the Israelis went there to dismantle surveillance and intelligence devices that belong to Turkey. And the message, of course, Israel did not confirm that, but the message that Israel sent to Damascus that don't get closer to Ankara. So it seems that this hotline, this deconfliction mechanism, and this American attempt to repair the relationship between two key allies in the region is not that strong, that it needs a lot of working. And maybe I will use the word fragile to describe it. I don't know.
Yeah, listen, I agree. Early on in this podcast, I said that whether it's on Syria or Lebanon, U.S. diplomacy is bumping up against the hard Israeli reality. And U.S. and Israel are not necessarily on the same page in these two geographies. So I agree.
Okay, let's go to the final segment of the question, and we will release you, Shiraz, don't worry.
No, I'm enjoying this very much. Let's keep going.
Okay, so there was one headline that really caught my attention that I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts about it. Bibi saying that October 7th wouldn't have happened if Trump were president, that Iran would be more careful if Trump was in the White House. And basically, the article, Mr. Netanyahu arguing that the Biden administration now has threatened to impose arms embargo on Israel. And in the conversation between him and Mr. Blinken, he said that Israel will that it will fight with its fingernails. And I find it really interesting that right now we are using hypothetical scenarios to distort reality and, escape responsibility. Like everyone knows that Mr. Netanyahu received number of security reports and put in his that he basically dismissed. And he also funded Hamas and contributed to that regard. But I just don't know. Like even if the assumption that he's not directly involved in that, he will not take the moral and ethical responsibility of October 7th, which happened under his watch. And I don't know whether the Trump is it like he's using these kind of statement to appeal to Mr. Trump? Is it like how do we read these kind of statements?
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. Listen, everybody understands that President Trump has a very healthy ego. And that it is politically expedient to play to that ego and to come to the President of the United States bearing homage with plenty of respect and plenty of credit to offer. And so Bibi Netanyahu, who in the past doesn't necessarily have a positive relationship with President Trump, I would refer you to certain books that were published about the first Trump term, and the elections which President Trump lost, in which President Trump used, let's just say, unpolite words to refer to Netanyahu, particularly given that Netanyahu was the first foreign leader to publicly congratulate Biden on his electoral win when Trump himself was still contesting the results of those elections. So I think it's very politically expedient for Netanyahu to come bearing all that praise for President Trump time and again. But Trump himself understands that you got to work with the reality that you have. He is very much still focused on this idea of getting to a normalization between Saudi Arabia, other Arab and Muslim countries who would come along with Israel, and unlocking that pathway, which he time and again refers to, his advisors, Steve Witkoff and others, time and again refer to, just as recently as a couple of days ago, as that pathway towards a much-deserved Nobel Prize. And I think President Trump and the administration realize that they have to work with the reality of Netanyahu on the ground, even perhaps to the extent of trying to provide him political cover, because he is liable on a whole host of things, not just perhaps his complicity or his negligence around the unfortunate attacks of October 7th, but also corruption charges and a whole host of other things. But if President Trump is to find his pathway towards that deal, the deal of the century, he feels he needs to work with Bibi, with the reality of what Israeli politics is today. And there are many cases of where kind of the strong man, the extremist strong man, then is the one who is best positioned to then sign on a dotted line and make a deal. And that's the view from Washington, or at least the hope that Bibi, despite the fact that there's no love lost between the two men, that they've butted head time and again before, can eventually deliver under the right circumstances what Trump is hoping his legacy in the Middle East to be about.
Yeah, interesting. We hope that this year will pass very quickly and we reach elections as soon as possible before this going to materialize. I have a last question, Firas, about the meeting that took place in the White House, which included Tony Blair, Kushner, Don Derner, and of course, Witkoff. We don't know exactly like the details of this meeting, but we know that it tackled the issue of post-war Gaza. Now, this meeting attracted a lot of attention in the Arab-speaking media. And I have to say, they tackled it from a perspective of caution and maybe suspicion. A big part of it due to both gentlemen, controversial history and initiatives in the region. And maybe the most important concern here is that both of them, they will not put the Palestinian interest as a priority in any plan that they are proposing. And my question, I don't think it's fair that we judge any plans that or consultation that they provided without actually knowing the content. But my question is, Firas, that we already have initiatives by the region, by the Arab countries, whether we're talking about the Cairo initiative back in March or the Saudi Franco initiative. And in both plans, you have the Arabs saying that we are willing to the reconstruction of Gaza and the rehabilitation of the Strip. We are willing to put boots on the ground. We are willing to address all the security needs that Israel have. Hamas will not play a role in that. They also condemned Hamas. And my question is, like, because you said, like, he's more of a businessman. How on earth, like the Trump administration is willing to invest in any plan that and put that large amount of money without addressing, as you said, the root causes of the problem and basically dismissing all of these regional initiatives?
Yeah, I gave you my answer to that question early on in the podcast. Color me skeptical when it comes to all these big schemes that have a Trump name to them. I mean, we're talking about Netanyahu wanting to come bearing offerings and give credit to President Trump. I think that's true of all those around him. I've never seen a U.S. cabinet meeting the way that I see U.S. cabinet meetings in a Trump administration, where essentially all these senior officials, the secretaries, go around the table, taking turns to heap praise on the president. And I think in many ways, whether it's Jared Kushner or Tony Blair, they come with this big grandiose idea of something that bears the Trump name on it that they can do in Gaza. It plays to what he wants, or his preference to see a Riviera or something, I would say magical appear in Gaza in a post-conflict scenario. I don't think it goes anywhere. I think it dies. The Arab media had a bit of a circus with this meeting, because I think it was Steve Witkoff himself on Fox News a day before that said, we have a very important meeting the next day in the White House. And then the administration downplayed it and it's not being as important. So I think in the overall scheme of things, we will remember this as being a blip on the radar that is forgotten about. What is much more substantial, but can potentially have traction, is exactly what you referenced. It's that Arab offer to Israel to help in the day. Essentially, it's an exit ramp, an off-ramp for Bibi from the quagmire that he's been in Gaza now for 2 years. where for the first time the Arabs are saying, not only is there no place for Hamas in the day after, but we are also ready to put boots on the ground. The Egyptians are right now training some 5,000 soldiers, Palestinian security forces, to assist in the day after. The Emiratis have time and again been engaged in discussions that under the right condition, they all will be forthcoming in trying to organize the security and the reconstruction of the day after. This is obviously not to speak of the Saudis, which loom large in the entire discussion, and the push for a recognition of a Palestinian state in UNGA at the end of September. So again, this is an unprecedented moment. And in terms of what President Trump himself wants to achieve, the Arabs are signaling that there's a right way to do it, and then there's a fanciful way to wish it. And I would categorize that meeting in the White House with Kushner and Blair as a fanciful discussion of what might be one day that will never be realized.
And there is also a wrong way to do it because Israel government just recently advanced the takeover of Gaza despite repeated recommendations from the Chief of Staff General Eyal Zamir that this kind of approval will enrich basically Israel in occupying Gaza. It will risk the hostages' lives. It will basically put the lives of IDF soldiers in danger, and most importantly, it will also jeopardize the safety of the Palestinian people in this trip. Firas,
I have, if I may, a last word. I have a lingering hope that I have not given up on, that all of this is much bluster and threat to be used as leverage in a last-minute attempt at a ceasefire in the lead up to UNGA some 3 weeks from now. I hope that ends up being the case. Bibi has his own domestic considerations to factor in, including with Smotrich and Ben Gvir, and unfortunately perhaps having to give more on the West Bank. But if that does not end up being the case, and if Israel does in fact launch that military campaign into Gaza City, which many believes, including the head of the IDF, will be very costly to Israel and to the Palestinians, Israel's isolation will only grow in the international community. Never have I ever, in the course of my career, seen Israel so isolated in the international community, in Europe, in the West, in the lead up to this big platform where these issues are going to be debated in UNGA. And I would just say, when you're in a hole, the best advice that one can be given is to stop digging. And Netanyahu keeps on digging.
Stop digging. Okay, with that, we're going to conclude. And thank you so much, Firas, for your insights, for your contribution to this episode. We really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And I have to, of course, thank Salome, Emily, and, of course, Mani. Thank you, everyone, and see you next month.